Welcome to the MJSA podcast. My guest on this episode is Scott Bradford. He's a member of the Rio Grande Tech Team and an expert on all things related to jewelry making, specifically when it comes to creating and teaching and troubleshooting things like CAD designs and 3D models and casting, and the list really goes on. So, Scott, welcome to the MJSA podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you on board, and the conversation today is about casting. Specifically, we're taking a look at and talking about kind of avoiding typical casting mistakes and really trying to give jewelers and jewelry makers in general and manufacturers and anybody creating things that, a sense of what they need to know about casting. So I guess we can start with what are some of the most common mistakes that you think that you see that designers and manufacturers make when it comes to casting? Do you think it occurs somewhere in the initial design and planning stages? Are they not accounting for technical issues, or are the designs too complex, features too small, things like that? Where do you think the majority of the issues come from?
Well, I think part of it is a need to understand the practical aspects of the whole process. So it's easy to get really zeroed in on the thing that you're working on, let's say design and CAD design. But knowing what's going to be faced by people down the road, like the casting, the polishing, the stone setting, that's going to make your designs that much better. And an example of that is in the shop that I first worked in, we had, along with myself, we had a few other jewelers. So they had their own ways that they like to do things. Let's say I'm going to be doing some stones running down the side of a band. Some preferred to have the seats cut, the prongs already there, everything just kind of ready so they could pop the stones in and be done. And some didn't prefer that way. They preferred I hate to call it, old school, but that's kind of what it is, as far as cutting the seats themselves, raising beads, cleaning it up, all that sort of thing. So I could actually tailor the design based on who was going to be doing the stone setting. And I even had my own personal preferences there. So,
right.
Knowing about the process down the road is incredibly important. And I encourage anyone who's learning CAD design, go take some jewelry classes. Even if it's not something you're going to be actively doing, learn the process. You can get a good idea for things like proper thicknesses of ring shanks or various elements of a ring or an earring or a pendant. And you can know where you can kind of lighten things up or maybe make things a little heavier based on how it's going to be worn.
Right. So it's really about, educating yourself about the process, which I'm sure then makes it easier, I would think, to be able to communicate with your caster about all the information about a potential project. How you're delivering the models, what steps you've taken so far to prepare things, and being able to communicate that, I'm sure, is a big part of the process as well.
Well, an effective communication, you can't put a price on that. So if someone's going to be doing the casting for you, talk with them. Or if someone's going to be doing the setting for you, talk with them as well on what they want to see and general guidelines. Most of the time, they are more than happy to provide that information because it makes the entire process that much easier for all parties.
So if I'm a designer putting myself in those shoes and I'm coming to the process here, and I'm when it comes to something that's CAD created and designed, and then likely maybe 3D printed, versus something that I might be sending in that's a hand carved piece versus something I've done where I have milled molds and models and stuff, or other molds. How much does the format that I would deliver something in impact the casting, or is it something that most casters are able to sort of handle if they know ahead of time what to expect?
Most of the time, they're able to handle that. I mean, in those casting shops, for the most part, they've seen it all come through the door at one point or another. So I think for the most part, they know how to handle that. Part of it too is kind of covering yourself. Like say a hand carved wax. That is the, the only one that I have. So I need that casting to turn out perfectly the first time. So I might ask the caster, hey, can you mold this first, just in case? A lot of places are more than happy to do that. It just kind of depends on the caster that you're going to and what they offer, because some are very much kind of cast and clip, and then some offer a lot of services on top of casting.
Right, but that first step being that you're, at least with the hand carved piece, you're giving yourself a backup or a
Right.
a sort of a fail safe, a safety a safety valve, a safety option there.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you
yeah,
have the security of having the mold already, so you can make as many as you need. And as far as a CAD file, I actually look at a CAD file as a master mold or as a master model.
hmm,
So, and that's the way I try to encourage people to think about it, is because rather than having this tangible master that I have to hang on to in my safe, and never lose, because my my livelihood depends on those master models. So yeah, my CAD file effectively becomes that digital master. So as long
right.
as I have that, then I can always print another.
Right, and obviously you can always reference that. You can always print another. You can always, you're making changes if those come up and updates to that directly. So that really is the the ultimate, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
master file. That makes a lot of sense. I would think too the other issue. I'm wondering if this is the other issue. Is that obviously depending on sort of what material you're delivering. If it's not a CAD file and it's, you're actually delivering some kind of printed model or whatever, you, some of that, how much effect does what the material you're using have? Is that just something else to communicate ahead of time to your caster at that point? Obviously, some things are going to have, some materials are going to have more or less wax. Some of them are going to have, it's going to affect burnout, things like that. Is that something to consider, or something to at least communicate ahead of time?
100%. Because as much as I would love for all castable resins to behave the same, that is definitely not the case.
Right.
So in a lot of cases, like when I talk to people that are new to resin casting, I try to get them in the mindset of think of that initial period as like the testing period. You're dialing in all your processes to get a good casting. Now those casters have also done the same thing with whatever materials they're using. So in most cases, I would say um, talk with them to see it. Another resin may throw a bone into the works. So talk with them about what they prefer. They may be perfectly fine with it. They may prefer their material, and
Right.
might make the process easier for both parties again. So yeah, talk with
Yep.
them and see what they say.
Yeah, I guess that's the, that's the thing to remember too. Is that you're going to a professional here who has, as you said, seen a lot of things probably come in the door and knows what to expect and knows the ins and outs of how different things are going to behave. So there's a certain amount of trust. I think that you can apply at that point and let them give you feedback on what might work out the
Mm-hmm.
best. Obviously, everybody's working toward the common goal here of wanting a great casting, so that makes sense. How often is it that and this is something that probably gets a little easier with the more designs you do, the more experience you have. But how often is it that you have to go back to the drawing board, which may involve going back to a customer or somebody that you're making something for, and say, "Hey, this was a great design, but casting wise, it's not going to work out. We need to make changes." Is that just something that you have to get better at over time, or how often does that happen?
It happens more often than you think, because every design is unique, and
Right.
they offer unique challenges. So there are some basic guidelines that mainly you'll learn through experience, like how big to make a prong for a certain size stone, or um, maybe if it's some kind of split shank that has a thin shank going between, well, how thick do you need to make that to make it wearable over time? And so things like that mainly come with experience. But yeah, and in a lot of cases, I think as designers and jewelers, um, when a customer comes to us with a design in mind, it's part of our responsibility to bring that experience to help them create the best design. So I have had designs brought to me that were impossible. I mean,
Right.
it's easy to create something in CAD that looks interesting, but it doesn't really make it producible in the real world. So I think that's part of our responsibility, is to say, these things need to be around this thick, or this area is a little too thin, or these details are not pronounced enough. They're not going to be there
Right.
after polishing. So that's part of our responsibility.
Like,
It's really fun. I mean, customers will challenge you in ways you never expected, and they'll bring interesting designs more with the idea of, can this be made, rather than, I want this made. So
right.
they're really good at challenging you, and doing things that you don't necessarily expect. And I'll give you a quick example. I had a guy come in one time to the shop, and he was, and I don't know the name that they call themselves, he was a professional yo-yo thrower, or whatever you called it.
Right. Right.
And he had an idea for a custom bearing for his yo-yo, and he did a demonstration in the shop. And I mean, he was like Bruce Lee with nunchucks with that thing. It was amazing.
We're gonna have
But
to we're gonna have to look this up and put it into the show notes now.
right.
After the fact. Yeah.
But yeah, he had an idea for this bearing, so we designed it, we print it, we cast it, and yeah, it worked out great. And as far as I know, he's still using it. But
Wow.
yeah, certain things like that, you really don't expect to come across
Right.
your bench,
Right.
and then there it is. So
Yeah. Can you think of something that you maybe say a mistake, or something that you learned early on in the process of learning, as you said, design and the fabrication or casting process, a mistake that you made that really sort of was a big learning moment for you? Is there one that stands out?
one in particular was when when I first started in the industry. I was working with a solid skate printer. So it was my job to run it, maintain it. Um, and with the solid skate material, it was just like wax. I mean, same day burnouts, no problem. Size didn't matter. It was great. And then the I started working at another shop that wanted to develop a CAD department, and we got a resin printer. So so I printed some resin, tried to cast it, came out looking horrible, horrible.
Right.
So so this was kind of a new frontier as far as my casting experience. So in that, you have to break down each individual step as far as the cleaning, the curing, the investment you're using, what mixing ratio, what burnout you're using, and how long are those times and temps. And there's all these different things to adjust. So so that was probably the biggest learning experience, was kind of figuring out in the dark how to cast this new material that they were calling castable. Um,
Right.
and luckily, I found a small community of people online that were also in the same situation I was in. We all started working together and posting our results online, uh, because we knew that if we were in this situation, other people were too, and maybe they just hadn't found this group yet. So we threw it out there, and tried our best, and eventually got it to cast. People started sending me their own materials, and I started testing those and providing burnout
Right.
schedules and things like that. So it was more of a shift from the artistic side of jewelry making to a very technical side,
Right.
and really digging into the science of what's going on and why.
And I think that's a good example, and especially since it also touches on sort of what has become sort of a theme that we talked about earlier in the conversation, which is, it was about communicating and reaching out to other professionals, other people who knew and had worked with that, and coming to find a solution, which is ultimately what it's all about when you're working, in this case, with a caster or a contract manufacturer. So makes a lot of
But I'm
sense.
very much very big on collecting information and disseminating it. I've seen certain techniques within jewelry and watchmaking that tend to die with the people who created them, because it is it's something that they developed and it's theirs and it's what sets them apart, and I understand that. But some of those things can die off, and then people forget about them. Damascus is a perfect example of
Mm.
that. Damascus
Hmm.
was made for a very long time, but the way it was done was very secretive. And then when the people who knew how to do it died, years, 10,
Yeah.
20, 100 years later, everyone had to kind of figure it out
Right.
how they did that.
Right. And to reverse engineer it and to hope that they could sort of get it back. That's a
Exactly. So
yeah.
yeah, sharing information is very, very big for me. And it's okay to have a few of those things that are yours and set you apart. That's totally fine. But
Sure.
yeah, there's a next generation that needs information. So I think part of it is our responsibility to help them be successful.
Absolutely, definitely agree. I know that we definitely share that sentiment as well. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We
Of
appreciate
course.
having you on
Thank
the
you for
show.
having me.
Great information. Thanks.